Thanks everyone for coming here tonight. It's really my great pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the research that we're doing in the Computer Science and Engineering department, especially because, as all of you know, we really are entering a very fascinating world, a world where we have the capability to deploy millions of sensor devices that can monitor both our environment and also ourselves. So we have the ability to collect very fine-grained information in near real time and basically pump this information both to power new scientific discoveries and scientific applications, but also applications that affect us in our everyday lives. So let me give you some examples of these sensor networks that are actually deployed already today. So as one example, scientists are deploying sensors on top of volcanoes to monitor seismic activities. Other scientists are putting sensors in different bodies of water to monitor the various ecosystems. And these bodies of water range from lakes to rivers, and even recently to instrumenting the bottom of the ocean. Astronomers are building increasingly large and increasingly powerful telescopes to survey the skies. And of course, all these sensor networks are not limited to the environment. Engineers are also deploying sensors to monitor man-made structures such as the data centers that we are building that are increasingly large and also increasingly more difficult to manage. And sensors are then percolating and making their way into our everyday lives. Radio frequency identification tags are now being attached and are finding their way into our documents, into our wallets, onto our objects. One exciting application of this technology is for elder care. At the Intel Research Seattle, the researchers are using these RFID tags to instrument objects in elderly people's houses and use this information from the RFID equipment to monitor and detect the activities that they are performing such that people can see that they're doing well or that they might need some extra help. All these sensors that are deployed around us can also be deployed on us and can be connected to our cell phones to help collect, process, and transmit the information. And some people are taking this even further. They are putting sensors inside their bodies to maybe enhance their different senses. And finally, we also have sensors on the different toys that we're buying for our children. So all these sensors can really enable us to do all sorts of great applications, both in sciences and more user-oriented settings. But there are challenges. So tonight we'll focus on two aspects of the problem. First, how can we go about extracting information from all this low-level sensor data? And this is what I will be talking about in the first part of tonight's presentation. But second, with all these sensors out there, all these sensors around us, how can we protect our privacy and security? And this is what Professor Kohno is going to talk about in the second part of tonight's talk. But of course, both of us are, well, we're just professors. So what do? Well, we mostly go around and give nice talks. But all the, as you all know, all the heavy lifting is actually done by our wonderful students here at the University of Washington and collaborators both here and outside. And here I've outlined some of my students and collaborators. In yellow are the ones that actually participate in the projects that I will be talking about tonight. And here are the different projects and collaborators and also students for Professor Kohno. So we'd like to thank them all very much. They are responsible for most of what we will be presenting tonight. So let's go back to sensor data management. How can we extract information from all the sensor data? So there are many challenges to this problem, but they told me I can only talk for 20 minutes. So I decided to pick only one problem, which is that of how can we ask questions and get answers from these imprecise streams of information. And I will be talking about two technologies that we have developed. One is called Lahar, which is our event detection engine, and the other one, Cynic, which is our event specification engine. And all this will be in the context of one concrete application, which is RFID. So what is RFID? RFID stands for radio frequency identification, and it's a technology that enables us to do wireless identification. It's already used in different settings. For those of you who come from the East Coast, have used things such as Fastlane or EasyPass. These systems are based on RFID. Libraries are using RFID to tag their books. We now have RFIDs in our passports, in our enhanced driver's licenses. Credit cards include RFIDs. Many companies use this technology for keycard access. And finally, with things like the Orca card here in Seattle, the Oyster card in London, and others, people are using the technology for transit systems. So these are still reasonably simple applications. More complex applications are also emerging with, as I mentioned, deployment of RFID for elder care, which require extracting information about the activities that people are doing. And also very important deployments in hospitals. Hospitals are very large. They have a lot of employees, a lot of patients, a lot of equipment, a lot of samples. If we can, by instrumenting the movement and following the movement of people, the movement of all this equipment and these samples, we can really improve the efficiency of hospitals. We can do things such as verify that the correct patients are getting the correct procedures, ensure that equipment is being inspected on time, and so on. So there are actually a lot of trial applications out there for hospitals. And of course, one of the great challenges is that each deployment requires us to modify the types of events that are going to be detected from the RFID data to meet the needs of the concrete deployment. And this is a big challenge. So those are great applications. So how does this technology behind the applications work? So the basic idea of RFID is that we have RFID readers, and these are connected to one or more RFID antennas. What the readers do is that they periodically power the antennas, and the antennas then emit a radio signal. We then have RFID tags, and here's actually an example of such an RFID tag. The cheap ones do not have any batteries. They're very small, very inexpensive, in the order of maybe 20 cents, and they can be attached to different objects. So these tags do not do much by themselves. By themselves, they really do nothing. But if they go in the vicinity of the antenna, they can use the signal that the antenna sent to power themselves and tell the RFID reader that they are in the vicinity of the antenna. So what the reader can do is then use this information to populate a table, such as the one shown here, that will tell us what tag was detected, when it was detected, and where. So let me animate this slide, and you will see the RFID tag will go across these three antennas, and at the same time, we will populate the table. So what are the challenges if you want to extract high-level information from this low-level data? There are several challenges. First, we only get samples of location. Often, I do not want to deploy antennas and readers everywhere because of interference possibilities or for other reasons, so I will only have samples of locations. But of course, applications don't want to say things. If patient number 325 is detected under antenna 677, then 688, then trigger a patient got an electrocardiogram event. Applications want to reason about rooms and this kind of high-level location information. Second, RFID is not a perfect technology. If I put a tag too close to my body or too close to metal, the tag will not be detected. So we will have gaps in our stream of location. And finally, as I mentioned, we want to personalize the event detection for the different deployments and applications. So our goal in our research is to answer these questions and to build systems that make it easy to detect events and also personalize them. So we are doing this in the context of a project that we call the Rfid Ecosystem. What we have done in this project is to instrument our entire computer science building with about 47 RFID readers, which gives us 160 antennas, so 160 locations across the 7 floors, which includes the basement of our building. For the past year and a half, we had about almost 70 participants with more than 300 tags in use every day in the building. And our goal is to use this information, use this data to then develop these data management systems. But we're also using this deployment to study things such as the societal, the business implications of this technology. In particular, I want to emphasize that all our users actually have complete control over who has access to their data, when, at what granularity, and they can also erase the data about themselves. So let me show you a concrete example of how we can actually track the kind of data that we get as part of this, our deployment. So here's an example of, this is a snapshot of one floor of our building, the floor plan for one of those floors. In the blue ring here, which I can actually also emphasize, the blue ring here in the middle of the image is going to be a person actually walking through the building. Let me get this away. The green dots represent the RFID antennas. So every time the blue ring will go onto one of these antennas, the antennas will flash a different color to indicate that it is reporting the location of the person. So let me actually animate this, and let's follow the circle, and the person will walk along the corridor, through the room, and along this other corridor. So as you can see, the person is walking, and as the person is walking, we can see the antennas reacting and actually detecting the location of the person. So this is great, and in this case, we were also fortunate because we actually, all the antennas detected the tag. This is a good trace that we have handpicked. Very frequently, we also have gaps in this information. But even with this perfect data, if I want to ask questions such as if this is a patient, this patient get into this lab, it's difficult at this level. So the way we do it is that in our system, we're using a technique from artificial intelligence. What we're going to do is we have a model of the way people walk in the building. We can say they walk in different directions. They cannot go through walls. And what we will do is that we're going to use the sensor information as a way to just get more confidence and more probabilities for certain trajectories over others. So in this video, what you can see is all the red dots represent guesses of our model of the location of the person. So let me actually run this again. So as I animate this, we can see the person go through the floor again. And as they walk through the floor, you can see that our guesses are pretty accurate when they are in the corridor. When they go through the room, we have a lot more uncertainty about their location, and then zap, all our guesses go back to being reasonably precise when they walk along the other corridor. So this is really nice, because now instead of having these samples of location, we have information that is a lot richer. We now have information about each tag. For each time step, we're going to have a distribution of possible locations where the person is, with the probability associated with each of those locations. And even more than that, we have information that allows us to correlate and gives us probability that the person went from one location to another location at a different time step. So these streams of data are now probabilistic and correlated over time. So the question is, how can we now detect interesting events on this data? So the way our system called Lahar does it is that we specify queries in the form of state machines. Or if you want to think about them, you can also think about them as regular expressions. For example, if I want to know when a patient goes out of the room, therefore appears in the hallway, and then goes through different elevators, different hallways to eventually make it to a certain lab, we can specify this as a simple state machine and say when the person goes from the hallway eventually to reach the lab, please trigger the certain procedure event. And what I can do with this information is perhaps check that this is the correct patient getting the correct procedure. So what our engine will do is then take these state machines as input, take this stream of probabilistic and correlated data as another input, and it's going to run the state machine on the stream and will give us at each time step the probability that we are in this final state and that our query is satisfied. So the output of our system is going to take the form of this signal. So on the x-axis here, you can see time, and on the y-axis is the probability that the query that the patient actually has this exam is being satisfied. So at first, you can see that the probabilities need to near 0, and when this event actually happens, we have a peak, and finally we go back to 0 with possibly some false positives. This is an example where a person just walked by a room without really entering it. So this is all great, and this allows us to basically to extract and identify these events. But I'm sure that, except maybe for engineers, no one really wants to specify queries in the form of state machines. So what we also developed is we developed a graphical interface. And this is also a challenge. How can I tell a user who's maybe a hospital administrator, how can I let them specify events when everything gets mapped into these probabilities over these correlated streams? I don't want them to have to worry about all this information. So let me show you an example of how our tool works. So what we have done is use the movie, basically a movie scenario metaphor. So what the user does is simply create scenes, and I know the fonts are not very clear on the screen, but the user basically creates scenes. Each scene contains actors, objects, and places. And there can be many scenes in a sequence. So in this example, this is actually a student who created the animation. So of course, the event is a student and their advisor meeting. So first, both of them are outside the office, and then both of them will be together inside their office. And as you can see, this is a very intuitive interface, very, very easy for people to use. We actually had experiments with non-technical users, and they could specify interesting events in a matter of minutes. And what the tool will do is then, once the user says that he or she is done and press submit, our tool will actually translate this event into this query language, which basically specifies the actual state machine. This is actually, in fact, an older version of the system where it was a little bit out of control in terms of complexity. We now have a more concise language, but still, right, none of us wants to manipulate, ask queries at this level. We would all prefer to use this graphical interface. So those are basically two challenges. We now have a tool to extract events. We have a tool to specify events, but this is not everything. So things I do not have time to talk about is, for example, scale. If I have these very large streams, it's going to take me a very long time to answer queries. Can I index them? But how do I index them because of all the probabilities? Can I maybe leverage approximations, lossy compression, since my streams are inaccurate anyways? If we go back to the scientific applications, if my data is not just RFID streams, but images from telescopes that arrive at 30 terabytes a day, how can I process the data at this extreme scale? We need new paradigm. We need new types of database management systems. And also we need new ways to support users, more than event specifications. How can they verify that what they have done is correct? Can they collaborate together in managing all the sensor data and asking questions on it? So these are all things that we are looking at in our lab, and I invite you to visit our webpage for more information. So in summary, sensor deployments are really transformative to sciences and to user-centered applications. But in order to extract and exploit all this information, we need new database management systems. The data processing challenges were numerous. I focused on imprecision, but there's also the question of scale, question of distribution, failures happening in this environment, and also very, very important, with all these sensors around us, how does this affect our privacy and our security? And this is what my colleague, Professor Kohno, will talk about now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Magda. As Magda said, and as I think our talk alluded to, technology is wonderful. So technology is a great enabler, and I think we all share this view as engineers or related to engineers. So with technology, you can improve many, many things, such as education, healthcare, social activities, leisure, and so on. And I think this is all fantastic. But one of the questions that I always ask myself is, are there any potential downsides? Well, it turns out that there could be, namely when we throw the malicious hacker into the mix. And this hacker or set of hackers, they might be really malicious, or maybe they're just curious, but they have the potential to turn these wonderful new technologies upside down. So they can create new problems for people, and they can also heighten the risks of classic problems. So for example, identity theft has been an issue for a very long time, but technology has just made that easier. A key focus of my research is to anticipate what might be the hot new technologies over the next 5, 10, or 15 years, and then start figuring out how to address those risks early. As I really like to say, we really want our cake and to eat it too. So my vision is that if we can identify and address the security and privacy risks with future technologies today, then we can start receiving the wonderful promises of these new technologies in the future without the associated security and privacy downsides. And so I'm going to talk about 3 example directions along this theme. For my first example, I'm going to talk about the new US passport cards and the Washington State enhanced driver's licenses. So these are cards designed to be low-cost alternatives to a passport. The idea is that these cards, people can use these cards instead of passport to cross the border via land and sea between the US, Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Bermuda. So inside each of these cards is an embedded RFID chip. So Magda already talked about these. These are radio frequency identification chips that whenever it goes near an RFID reader, some wireless reader, it'll broadcast a serial number. So here are some photos of a US passport card and also a Washington State enhanced driver's license. We actually took 2 real US passport cards, or a real US passport card and a real enhanced driver's license, placed it up against a light box and took these pictures. So you can see inside here there's an antenna inside each of these cards. So there are multiple claimed or implied goals of including RFID chips in these cards. The first is to enable more efficient border crossings. The idea is that as I drive between the US-Canadian border, I might put this RFID tag on my dash, and the border agent, the equipment at the border would pre-read the serial number off this tag and then prefetch all the information about me and have it available for the border agent when I come up to their booth. There's also some discussion that these RFIDs may make it harder to create forged or copied cards. So what we wanted to do as our group was we wanted to understand the privacy and security properties of these devices as they were currently issued. And there are 2 consequences of this. The first is that we can propose new technologies to address any security and privacy vulnerabilities we would find. We can also engage the broader community about other methods for addressing any deficiencies. So one of the first questions we asked was from how far away could someone read the information off of these cards? And this can affect the privacy for the bearer. This table here shows the distances with which we could read this card, or these cards. Inside a building down a long hallway, we were actually able to read these cards from very far away. Another interesting observation you might have is that the EDL could always be read from farther away under similar circumstances than the passport card. So why should we be concerned if someone can remotely read your passport card or your enhanced driver's license? On the one hand, information on these cards is not much. It's basically just the serial number. But even being able to read the serial number can leak private information. An attacker who can read your card multiple times, either at multiple locations or at the same location over time, will be able to learn potentially private information about your travels. As a concrete example, Magda already mentioned that within the University of Washington Computer Science and Engineering Department, we have what we call the Rfid Ecosystem, where 47 readers and 160 antennas throughout the building. So while the Rfid Ecosystem was designed to allow researchers to study RFIDs in new environments, the things that Magda talked about, we found that we could co-opt this system to track any person in the building with a passport card or enhanced driver's license. For example, we could track if a person left their office, walked down the hall, and then spent hours by the drinking fountain, or maybe how often they went to the restroom. So this is already private information, but we could also learn other private things. So for example, if you were still a student, how often would you really like it if your advisor could track your every motion, or if you're an employee, would you like it if your supervisor could track your every motion? Now, of course, as Magda said, we at the University of Washington wouldn't track anyone without their permission. And also, there are laws in certain regions that will prohibit the reading of RFIDs for tracking purposes. But please keep in mind that the passport card and the enhanced driver's license were explicitly designed for people who are traveling across international borders, where there might be fewer qualms about reading, tracking people, or maybe just trying to remotely identify whether they're a US citizen. So to address this issue, the passport cards and EDLs come with this protective sleeve. Basically, it's a little metal envelope. And the idea is that you would put your card in this metal envelope, and then it would be harder for someone to read or to remotely read and detect your RFID tag. So we purchased some of our own protective sleeves and tested them with an EDL and a passport card, and the results are shown in this table. So as you can see, the EDL was still readable through these sleeves, whereas the passport card was unreadable in most situations. We also experimented with a number of other attacks. We found that we could clone the contents of a passport card and an EDL onto our own RFID tags, thereby showing that the RFIDs themselves don't serve as strong anti-counterfeiting mechanisms. And we also found that some protective measures were not taken with the Washington State enhanced driver's licenses. And because of this, we can remotely, from say 50 meters away, disable someone's Washington State enhanced driver's license. We were experimenting with students' cards, so we did not actually do that last step of disabling it because he would no longer be able to use it. So our research raises numerous questions. So one of the questions you might be asking is, do passport cards and EDLs really need RFID chips in them? So are the advantages worth the disadvantages, or is it an overreaching of technology? Another question might be, what procedures are in place at the border to protect against the use of counterfeit RFID tags? And also, will people regularly use their protective sleeves? And as part of our research, we also proposed several defensive directions, both procedural and technological, to improve the use of these technologies. And so these include backwards compatible defenses that would improve the privacy, as well as backward compatible defenses to protect against the use of cloned RFID tags. And moreover, some of our defenses are broadly applicable to other uses of RFIDs, such as use of RFIDs in contactless payment systems or RFID credit cards, and also the RFID access control badges you might use to get into your building. So now let me turn to my second example, and this is robots. And I'll talk about robots because they're an example of technology that's receiving a lot of attention within the research community, and also a lot of attention within the public media as well. And so they're an example of a technology that might become much more ubiquitous over 5, 10, or 15 years. So what's in the future for robots? Some researchers are working on robotic maids. These robots will be in the home and help with cooking and cleaning. Some of these robots can also help elderly people who, for example, need help getting out of bed or can't cook for themselves. There's going to be a lot of innovation in robotic toys. These are robots that are designed for children, young adults, and hobbyists. So this is a video of a real present-day robot fighting competition in Japan. So one of those robots just scored a point. So here's another robot that will soon be entering the commercial market. As you can see, it's very sophisticated. It also has wireless capabilities, as you will soon see in the video. And as you can imagine, these wireless capabilities could provide a potential avenue for attack. So now here these two robots are communicating with each other, and as you can see, and it might be a bit hard to read, but they're communicating either via infrared, Wi-Fi, or voice. Another line of research focuses on creating companion robots. So this is a robot seal designed to help with healing. It's basically a pet for people who can't have pets. And this kind of robot is designed to provide people with comfort. So you can imagine having such a robot for elderly people, people with psychological or other impairments, and so on. The nursing home facilities and stuff the research we're talking about. So, and just to show you what's coming, here's a robot called Big Dog from Boston Dynamics. Research on Big Dog was funded by DARPA. It's designed to be a robot that can go anywhere that humans can go, upstairs and over rubble and so on. So while hopefully nothing like this will be entering our home in the near future, you can imagine technology like this eventually making its way into consumer products. So what are the risks with robots? So there's already been a lot of attention to traditional safety risks. So such risks might be a robot malfunctioning on a car manufacturing plant floor. And a lot of thought has been put into making these robots safe for the factory floor and so on. There's also been a lot of interest in robots that become too smart. This is a particularly popular topic of science fiction, where you have robots that become autonomous and try to take over the world. So the evil robots. But what about the risks of bad people controlling robots? So for some reason, the risk hasn't received much attention yet. I'm not sure if it's because it's not as exciting as a robot turned evil. But malicious actions by human-controlled robots is a much more pressing and near-term concern. So as with much of our research, what we wanted to do is we wanted to understand security and privacy properties of commercial robots as they exist today, with the goal of understanding what the challenges might be to securing future robots. Our focus was on robots in the home, that is, robots that would interact regularly with diverse groups of people and animals and pets and children and adults, so not robots in controlled environments with trained workers. So to ground our investigation, we obtained 3 leading examples of commercially available robots. And the robots we obtained were purchased on or before October 2008. This table describes the robot. The first one is the RoboSapien, was designed to be a toy. It has fairly low mobility in its environment, but does have a hand that can grip things. And one can use an infrared remote to control this robot. The robot in the middle of the Rovio was designed to be either a guard robot or a telepresence robot. It has high mobility in its environment, but no grippers. It has a video camera. It also has 802.11 wireless. So I mentioned 2 intended usage models, a guard robot and a telepresence robot. So for the guard robot, the idea is that you would have the robot in your home, and when you're on vacation from your hotel room, you would connect to your robot over the internet, drive it around, and check on your home status. So as a telepresence robot, one of the marketed goals is that you might keep it in your nursing home facility or your parents' house and use it to check up on them and make sure they're okay. And also use a two-way audio communications to talk with them. So the Spiky on the far right is like the Rovio in many ways, but except it was designed for children. So it's actually an erector set that you can buy for your child, for your 8 to 12-year-old. And then your child can assemble it and configure it and then wirelessly control it from his or her laptop within the home or from their friend's house over the internet. So the first thing we found is that the Rovio and the Spiky are not very discrete about their locations. An attacker could, for example, drive around a neighborhood and identify all the houses with the Rovio or all the houses with a Spiky. And it's very easy for an attacker to do this by observing 802.11 wireless traffic. The data here is artificial. We did not actually drive around trying to find Rovios. Okay, once an attacker has found a home with a Rovio or a Spiky, if the wireless network is not encrypted, then the attacker could use the robot's video camera to view what's happening inside the home, as well as use the microphone to listen in on what's inside the home. And again, the attacker could do this from within their car, or the attacker might be a neighbor. Here's a screenshot of the Rovio interface. The Rovio is looking at the couch in our lab. And here's also a screenshot of the Spiky interface. What's more, if these robots are in certain configurations, then an attacker could also access them remotely over the internet. There are some caveats, though not many. So given these results, it's not hard to imagine how someone bad might be able to do bad things with these robots. So spying on the occupants of a home is an obvious example. It also might be possible to do minor vandalism, such as knocking over small objects. You might be able to spook young children. So for example, remember that the Spiky was designed for children and therefore might be in a child's bedroom. And so you might turn on the robot at night and talk through it, et cetera. If we step back a little bit, I'm actually pretty concerned about putting robots with webcams in private places of the home, especially when these robots are designed to be built and administered by children. But what I think is also even more concerning is these findings are indicative of even greater potential threats in the future. So consider the companion robot like the seal I showed you earlier. Hacking a companion robot that's designed to provide people comfort, but if it's owned by, say, a child with emotional needs and so on, is downright mean. But we've also all heard stories about the mean kid down the block who might do very vicious things. So also keep in mind that future robots will have much greater functionality. So if you compromise them, you might be able to do much more. So given all this, it's very important to start considering today ways of improving the security and privacy of robots for the future. To make matters even more complicated, we identified what we're calling multi-robot attacks. So remember that the RoboSapien V2 had grippers, but it did not have a webcam, and also that the Rovio had a webcam but no grippers. Well, we demonstrated that if an attacker could compromise both robots simultaneously, then the attacker could do things with both robots that he couldn't do with any single robot. So if this comes up, so we demonstrated this as follows. So one of our PhD students, Tammy Denning, was outside the lab and could not see either robot. Yet she was wirelessly controlling both of them. So you can see here the screen that she was looking at. She couldn't see either robot directly, but by compromising the Rovio's webcam, she had the ability to watch the RoboSapien as she controlled the RoboSapien through an IR repeater. So the objective of this experiment was to have the RoboSapien pick up keys that were on the floor. And once the robot holds these keys in front of the webcam, the attacker can look at the ridges on the keys. So other researchers, in fact, a research group at UCSD led by a UW-CSE PhD alum, showed that it's easy to make exact duplicates of keys from photos such as the ones you're about to see. Okay. So, a bit of a... Okay, so there it is. So of course, these types of multi-robot attacks are, you might say, a bit artificial. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that everyone who has a robot go home and lock it in the closet and never let it out again. And of course, it's, the animations are, and actually conducting our experiments, even for the simple application, turned out to be, somewhat complicated. But it's clear that in the future, we not only need to consider the security and privacy of the devices themselves, but also potential interactions between heterogeneous collections of different devices. So stepping back, what have we learned? Well, one thing is that it seems that security and privacy are not the focus of current robot designs, at least not the robots that we studied for the home. But again, we studied the devices from October 2008 and not more recent ones. And our goal is also not to criticize the vendors. Rather, our goal is to focus attention on addressing the security and privacy needs of future robots. And this involves identifying and defining the challenges and the problems, and then figuring out directions for addressing them. And we also created a list of recommendations. So if anyone happens to own these robots, our website says what you can do to improve your security and privacy. So for my final example, I want to talk about medical devices. And I want to talk about medical devices because I truly believe that they have the potential to revolutionize healthcare. So they can really improve the quality of lives and actually save lives. So here are some examples of present-day devices. We have a pacemaker. We have 2 examples of neurostimulators, one designed to treat overactive bladder and the other designed to treat epilepsy. We also have cochlear implants, drug pumps that can dispense either insulin or morphine, and an exoskeleton to help with people with mobility. So if we look 5, 10, or 15 years in the future, we see a number of trends in these devices that are becoming increasingly computational. They're also starting to incorporate more long-range wireless capabilities. They're integrating more deeply into our bodies, both literally and figuratively. And there's also a trend towards multi-agent systems, where you might have 2 or more implantable devices within your body wirelessly communicating with each other and coordinating their activities. So the question that originally motivated our research on medical devices was, what new security and privacy issues might arise with these devices in the future, and how can we go about addressing these issues today? The first step to answering this question is to study the security and privacy properties of a real artifact, and that's exactly what we did with PhD student Dan Halpern here at the University of Washington, and also with collaborators at Harvard Medical School and University of Massachusetts. What we studied was an implantable cardiac defibrillator. We obtained a device that was manufactured in 2003, so it's a current generation device, but not the latest generation, and it has short-range wireless communication capabilities, 10 centimeters or so. Now, an implantable cardiac defibrillator is very much like a pacemaker. It's a device that's designed to treat cardiac conditions. The difference between a pacemaker and an ICD is that not only can the ICD issue regular small shocks to the heart, but it has a potential ability to issue a large shock to the heart to correct a potentially fatal heart rhythm. So here's a picture of an ICD in the patient's chest. It's kind of hard to see, but there's leads going into the heart. We use our own equipment, our own hardware, to analyze the security and privacy of this implantable defibrillator. Experimental setup was actually fairly cheap, less than $1,000. And using our own equipment, we could wirelessly spy on the communications between the ICD and external devices. So for example, when a patient goes into a clinic, the medical practitioners use a device to wirelessly communicate with the ICD, extract information about the activity since the last visit, and so on. We could use our own equipment to spy on this communication, and in doing so, we found no evidence of encryption. So spying on this communication, we could see the patient's name, the prescribing doctor's name, the implanting hospital, the conditions that the patient's being treated for, and so on. This was done at very short range, within approximately 10 centimeters from the device. So the likelihood of someone maliciously doing this exact thing in the real world is extremely small. But again, it's indicative of future concerns with future medical devices, which are being designed to have longer-range wireless communication capabilities. We could also use our own equipment to change the settings on the device, so change the patient's name as recorded on the device, change the therapies, disable therapies, and we could also make the device, wirelessly tell the device to issue a large shock. So let's step back a little bit and ask, is security and privacy for medical devices really important? We've shown that bad situations could arise, but would anyone actually really want to cause a bad situation? The answer to this question is actually incredibly complex, and indeed, computer scientists really shouldn't be answering it alone. That's why we're collaborating with Dr. Maisel at Harvard Medical School and talking with the FDA and others. But here are some things to consider. So first, these devices are evolving incredibly quickly, becoming, again, more computational and more wireless capabilities. When thinking about privacy, it's also useful to keep in mind that wireless devices are being designed to treat conditions with social stigmas. So there's wireless devices being tested these days to treat birth control and also sexual dysfunctions, for example. And also, in general, people view their medical information as private. As for who might want to change the state of the device, the attackers could run the gamut from terrorists to pranksters to competitors, and even people might want to compromise or change the state of their own device. So for example, if I had an implantable morphine pump, then maybe I'd want to increase the dosage just a little bit, or if I was a drug addict, maybe I want to increase it a lot more. To ground these threats a little bit more, I should point out that people have in the past used technology to do malicious things to other people. So of course, we all know about hacking into other people's computers and trying to steal identities. But this is an example of a teenager in Poland who hacked a train system that caused 12 people to be injured in the resulting accident. We also have evidence of bad people may attempt to randomly hurt innocent patients. So some of you may recall the incident in the 1980s with the Tylenol bottles being contaminated with cyanide. So in the technology world, there's also this incident in November 2007 during Epilepsy Awareness Month, where people flooded an epilepsy website with images that would cause photosensitive epilepsy patients to experience seizures. I'm not sure if you call them pranksters or what, but it clearly shows that some people will use technology to physically attack other people and patients. It turns out that you might think this was an isolated event, but in fact it wasn't. It happened again in March 2008. A similar thing happened this time to the Epilepsy Foundation website. So to quote from the caption to this article, this particular patient says she suffered her worst epileptic attack in years after she clicked on the wrong post at a forum for the nonprofit Epilepsy Foundation. So what does all this mean? In many ways, epilepsy patients are unique today because they are remotely attackable via computers, and as we say in the security field, their attack surface for these patients might be large. What's worse, we've seen that people have actually exploited this fact to try to hurt them. So our hypothesis or our concern is that unless we develop suitable defenses today, the attack surface for other patients may increase as medical devices become more sophisticated and more communicative. To make matters even more complicated, I wanted to re-mention that patients themselves may wish to tamper with their own devices. So if you search for body hacking, you will find interesting articles about people trying to modify their own bodies to do interesting things. First off, I would not suggest searching for this if you're a bit squeamish, but here's a picture of someone who has implanted a magnet underneath her finger, and the goal was to give herself a sixth sense, or the ability to feel magnetic fields with her hand. As medical devices become more sophisticated, we can only imagine other types of hacks that people might want to do to their own bodies. So just as a glimpse into what we might see in the future, here is an article about brain implants. And this part of the article talks about a patient who was given a deep brain stimulator, deep brain stimulator implant to treat social anxiety. And to quote from it, she was so enthralled by her improved mood that she asked her psychiatrist to turn up the voltage for a weekend social event. So clearly, patients may wish to modify the state of their own device. So if we step back a little bit, there are a number of lessons to draw from the results I just mentioned. First, we should observe that there are known techniques like cryptography that could have significantly improved the security and privacy of the ICD or the medical device that we studied. And the implication that security and privacy have been under-addressed, at least at the time that this device was manufactured, by both industry and the FDA. And I think this is something we really need to change. But in order to enact change, I believe that we need a unified effort by all relevant stakeholders, including the patients, engineers and scientists, the FDA, device manufacturers, and so on. But even if we get all these relevant parties on board, there are some number of fundamental technical challenges that remain. So one of the big ones is overcoming the tension between security and safety as you might traditionally define it. So here's the problem. So let's say we improve the security to the point that no unauthorized individual can modify the state of the device. So for example, only your prescribing doctor can change the settings on the device. But then let's say you're traveling and you're in another city or you're in another country and an accident happens and the emergency personnel there need to immediately change the state of your device. Well, because they don't have the appropriate cryptographic keys or the appropriate passwords, they won't be able to do so. And so that's a safety problem. Well, you might say, well, let's add a back door or some secret way that emergency personnel could actually come in and change the settings of the device. But the question is, why can't the bad guy use that back door as well? So how do we appropriately balance or trade off security in the common security and also safety in emergencies? And I think that's a big challenge, and one of the things that we're trying to address here at the University of Washington. And of course, a number of other challenges remain, such as overcoming traditional resource constraints on these devices and the human aspects and so on. So to summarize, I fully believe that emerging technologies can be game-changing, and they can really improve life for many individuals, and in many ways. As I hope you've seen in this talk, however, there may be many unexpected risks with these new technologies, and there will also be many challenges for overcoming these risks. And so these things, both identifying these future issues and addressing them, are things we're working on at the University of Washington. But I also firmly believe that computer scientists and computer engineers should not act alone. I'm very interested in engaging and working with broad sets of people. So not only from a research perspective, but working with the producers of these technologies, the consumers, the scientists, government, educators, and so on. So, thank you.
Thanks to Yoshi and Magda. We will take your questions. If you want if any of you have scribbled down questions, we'll collect them, and I'll try to read some of them for a couple minutes. While we're doing that, let me ask a couple of questions. I'll start with Magda. You talked a lot about some examples of how sensors are being used. Can you say something about what this is doing to science and how it's affecting scientists?
Oh, yeah, great question. So, in fact, in the talk, I focused mostly on user-centered applications, but all these sensor deployments are really game-changing for scientists for several reasons. Instead of having just one data set to play with that a scientist collected in order to answer a specific question, scientists are now downloading large amounts of data, and they can just ask many questions on this large survey, on these large databases that they are growing. And the second kind of game-changing element is that the data is now very fine-grained and can also be collected very quickly. For example, if there's some event that happens at the bottom of the ocean, the whole goal of this sensor deployment that is actually put in place here by some other University of Washington scientists is to then be able to collect the information right after that event occurred. So very timely information, very fine-grained, and just these large masses of information. So this is really game-changing for scientists as well.
Yoshi, you talked about the research you've done here in security and privacy. Do you want to say anything about education and its importance in security?
Yes, I think I would. So I think that one of the issues you've probably seen is that a lot of technologies out there, we've seen robots, we've seen medical devices. I've also, as Hank mentioned, I also worked before a lot on electronic voting machines. We see a lot of technologies out there that may not have the security and privacy properties that people want. So I'm actually very passionate about and trying to figure out new ways to teach people computer security. So how do we go about doing this? So I don't know how many people in this room are computer scientists or computer engineers. But one of the things I'll mention is that there's a lot of work out there already on how to teach people the technology of computer security. So if how does the latest and greatest encryption scheme work? How do the latest and greatest software security issues work? And my belief is that a lot of that is important, but is not the most important thing to teach from a computer security perspective. Really, for one reason being is that when, if I were to teach that today, these may not be the issues that will be important in 10 years or 20 years. And I really want to teach people how to think about security and how to design secure systems that they'll be able to take with them for their lifetime. The second thing is that I realize that people who take a computer security course, maybe 2 or 3 of them will become computer security researchers or work in computer security industry. But most people will actually probably work with systems that should be secure, but may not actually be directly security engineers. And so one thing I'm trying to instill within my courses is not the latest and greatest technology, but to teach people how to think about security. So in some ways, I'd say that if my course is successful, if someone who takes my course, before they take it, they see a new product on a news group or a website saying, oh, wow, this robot looks great. I can't wait to get it for my birthday. And then after they take my course, but as soon as they see a product online, oh, wow, this is a great robot, or wow, this is a great toy, the first thing they think is, wow, this is great. I can't wait to get one to play with. And I also wonder if someone bad could do something. And if they can think that way, then if they're 20 years down the road, they're working in a product, as long as they can think, I wonder if someone bad might be able to do something to this technology, then I think we've solved almost all the problem because they can bring in others to help them solve it. But the issue is really how can we make people aware that a problem might exist?
So here's a really good question. There's a lot of interest from these questions in RFIDs. So the first one is, do either of you have an RFID-based passport or driver's license?
I'm not an American.
I do not have one.
But my daughter does have one.
And I do not have one.
Okay, good.
But actually also maybe just to follow up on this question, the first thing I actually instrumented with my RFID tag is my laptop dongle. I don't know how many of you have laptops, but they come with all sorts of cables and dongles, so this is very, very useful, just from a very simple practical perspective. We also use it every day in our lab because by having an RFID tag on me, my students know where I am, so I can tell them, well, if you just, if you see that I entered my office and there's no one else with me, well, you can just come by, stop by, and we can chat. So it's very convenient, like we use it on ourselves every day, which is actually the first thing we used also for privacy. We started collecting data and just looking at the data, and I thought, oh my God, by looking at the data, if I do no research in security, I can see exactly when I went to the bathroom, what time I came, when I went for lunch. So that's something that we always experiment on ourselves first to see some of the issues.
So the next question is, if RFID chips in passports send passport numbers to readers, does the same thing happen with credit card information?
RFIDs are in credit cards, and there's been several generations of these RFID devices. So I have not myself looked at the latest RFID credit cards. I know that earlier, a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, researchers did study them, and they saw that, yes, I could walk up to you and with a little RFID reader in my pocket, sit next to you on the train or bump you as I'm walking, and yes, I'll know not only your credit card number, but also your name and the other information that's on the card. So yes, that was happening at least at one point. I know that people are within the credit card industry are also trying to address it, but I don't know the latest. If you have a credit card, please come and find me after. I'll be happy to look at it.
Somebody wants to know whether the computer science department system, RFID system, reads all tags or just ones it knows about, or can it poll or troll for other
So
tags?
our system has the ability to read pretty much any tag. This is an EPC Gen 2 system. But what we do is we have a registry of all the tags that are actually our tags. And what we do at the lowest level, so at the reader, is that as soon as we read the numbers, we check them against our list. If this is not a number on our list, we just discard the reading, and only the numbers on our list make it into our database.
Question is, who teaches cyberspace ethics?
That's a very good question. So ethics is actually incredibly important. I actually talk about ethics in my course. I know that Magda also teaches a course for ethics. So one thing I'll mention is that actually as part of a degree requirement for engineering, people have to actually have, receive some discussion of ethics within their, while completing their degree. So it's actually very important. I think that the ethical issues in computer science and computer engineering and computer security is incredibly important. So yeah, yes, we do try to address it.
Somebody wants to know whether there have been actual reports of, quote, evil people doing bad stuff with the robots, or you talked about, or others.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things I want to stress is I don't want people to come away from this talk being scared and saying, oh no, if I know someone with a medical device, they should be scared, or if I know someone with a robot, they should be scared. That's not the goal of this talk. I actually think that the risk today is fairly low. So especially in the medical device case, I don't know of any incident where bad things have happened. And I do believe that the risk to patients is currently low. But the reason we're looking at these technologies is because in 5 or 10 years, they will be much more sophisticated. And if we don't think about security and privacy now, we might in 10 years or 5 or 10 years say, oops, we made a mistake. We should have thought of it. And my hope is that by addressing it early, we don't say, oops, we made a mistake.
Magda, somebody wants to know what software and languages was used to write the Lahar and Scenic systems you talked about, and also whether you partner on SBIR grants with private firms.
Also, this is a good question. So most of the software that you write is written in Java, primarily because that's what the current generation of students know and loves. A lot of it is web-based, and we use things like the Google Web Toolkit to write this application. And also about partnering with, we did get some funding, for example, from Microsoft, but not so much because they were interested in RFID, but just because they are interested in systems for sensor management. And I just said, hey, we have these great sensors, we're doing this great stuff, give us money, and they bought it. So they gave me money.
These are all kind of related, obviously. There's interest in this. Can RFIDs be encrypted so only the right readers can see them?
Yeah. So I think that there are ways of using RFIDs in a more privacy-preserving manner. So yes, there's ways to do that.
Okay. I think we'll stop here. Feel free to come up and ask more questions. Thank you all for coming.